A few years ago, I made a video on a book called 1001 Video Games You Should Play Before You Die. It's this massively thick book that really does cover 1001 video games made from really the dawn of video games up until the late 2000s. And I really promoted the book as being something that really had a conclusive look at many of the ROMs you could go back and play. And it kind of took a slight dive into each of them, just a short article on each of them, overviewing them. And I found out about many classic games through that book that I was unfamiliar with. It was presented in just this awesome fashion, and kind of from then on, having bought that book for like $5 or $6 on eBay, and unfortunately people tell me in the comment section on that video now it's more like $25, which is honestly a deservable price, just such a good book. But since then I've gotten into buying and reading even more video game books, and many of them aren't particularly great, or they cover information that I've already seen elsewhere on YouTube. But recently I just got done reading a book called Console Wars by Blake J. Harris, and this book is fantastic. Now, there's actually a documentary sort of thing made on this book that kind of covers the story here, and it's an overview, a really 500-page deep dive, more so, into the battle between Sega and Nintendo, and a little bit of Sony in there as they became involved in the console wars of the late 80s and early 90s. And it's a phenomenal look with a terrible foreword by none other than Seth Rogen and Evan Goldberg, who actually, I think, made or contributed in some way to that documentary. Really, the defining characteristic of this book is the fact that Blake J. Harris did a series of interviews with all sorts of people that were involved in Sega, Nintendo, Sony over that time period, and he pieced the conversations that he had with them and the conversations they remember having with the other people that are involved in this story into a book that reads like a piece of fiction. There's people's conversations happening. So-and-so said this. There's conversations going on like you would typically see in a fiction book, even though this is a piece of nonfiction. And of course, it's Blake J. Harris's interpretation of how the conversations kind of came together based on his firsthand accounts of hearing the conversations in his interviews with these people many years later. So the person that I think the book primarily focuses on is Tom Kalinske, who came from Mattel to Sega of America. Now, of course, Sega of America controlled by Sega of Japan, but Tom Kalinske was definitely the one that seemed like the book focused on the most, or it shared his point of view the most. And just the way this book is written in this way that kind of lays out the conversations, and I think sways more towards Blake J. Harris maybe having a bias being in support of Sega, of the underdog. At least that's the way it seems like it's written to me. Really takes a great look at all of the marketing that kind of went into building up Sega into this competitor that at one point in time split the console hardware and software business with Nintendo. They were 50-50 in the market. Sega went from being this underdog in America to kind of being 50-50 neck and neck in the 90s between the Genesis and the Super Nintendo. And as somebody that went to school for marketing, does marketing as a job, this is a phenomenal book from a marketing standpoint because of what they had to overcome in order to take this scrappy company like Sega, bring these new ideas to the market, these new ways of promoting things, making it be edgy, promoting it to a different demographic, and really being able to capture, in essence, 50% of the video game market in what was really just sort of this Pepsi versus Coke underdog story. Like I mentioned previously, oftentimes when I'd read these video game sort of historical books, oftentimes the information would come off as something that I'd already heard or seen in a YouTube video, because I've watched plenty of YouTube videos on the history of video games. But the unique thing about this book, and the fact that there were so many one-on-one interviews in order to make this book be possible, is there are details and different, plot points. And I say plot points again like this is a work of fiction, but it's not. That are in this book that are things that I was completely unfamiliar with. I mean, different, things they did to try and get Walmart to stock the Sega Genesis, the issues that Target had selling Nintendo products. I mean, conversations between company reps at, Walmart and Target and these people at Sega and Nintendo. These are things that never get covered in YouTube videos. Sega was originally unable to get their stuff on shelves in Walmart. Walmart wanted to work exclusively with Nintendo. They wanted to keep a positive relationship with them. And in order to finally break through after many failed attempts trying to get the Walmart reps to put the Sega stuff on the shelves, where they were buying up radio ads, billboards, you name it, trying to make it look like Sega was this huge deal, but they were concentrating all of this money and all of this effort just into the city where Walmart was headquartered, so that the people that worked in that city that ran the Walmart headquarters would see this and they'd think, Sega must be a big deal. They're advertising so heavily. Seems like the people in at least this city are passionate about Sega, and they marketed and advertised so heavily in Walmart's home city because they wanted to get Walmart on board. And after like a year or more, I think, of doing that, they eventually broke through and were able to get the Walmart rep to be like, just stop. We'll put it on the shelves. And it was crazy to hear that story because that's something that you don't see in many of these YouTube videos or other little documentaries I've watched, even about this specific topic. Now, this book was originally released in 2014, so there are plenty of old, used copies out there to find on eBay. I found that oftentimes those were in, like, say, the $12 to $15 range. I think I paid full price, like $20 MSRP at Barnes & Noble for this. And I'll tell you, because the book is like over 500 pages long, I feel like it was totally worth it. Also coming up in August, The Ultimate History of Video Games. It was a huge book that I read probably 5 or 10 years ago, came out in the early 2000s, was a book that covered, really the full detailed history of video games up until the early 2000s. That's getting a sequel, which is going to cover like 2000 to 2020, just here recently, the history of video games over that time period. That obviously being a time period where I was very involved in video games. I was, well, unlike in this scenario, I was actually born, I was actually playing video games in 2000 until 2020. So I'm looking forward to that book coming out in August. I will have a link down to both of these books in the description because I think they're worth checking out. And I will say that the newer released book, The Ultimate History of Video Games Volume 2 or whatever they're calling it, you can get that at Target. It's actually a little bit discounted. And I think that because of the massive size of that book, that's something that I'm going to pick up too. And I feel pretty good about paying, the 15% discount off the MSRP and not waiting to buy a used copy, because it just seems like there's a wealth of knowledge and information there that I'll greatly enjoy paging through. So if you're into video game books, definitely check both of those out down in the description. I'm Bailey, and I will see you in the next video.